In all the towns and cities and small communities of this country, there are daily catastrophes taking place for disabled people, for old people, for young people who have come to rely on the services of their local council. Many council, probably every council now, is cutting back on those services. And we find that not only are they being cut back, but they're being hived off to private companies who are now going to make a profit out of what we used to see as a service. This is not acceptable, and I think together we have to fight it. And in the coming film you'll hear of some of the stories that people are experiencing, some of the things people are experiencing, the privations they're undergoing. It's particularly savage if you're disabled, if you don't have much money, if you're old, and if you're young, say that young student who needs a library who can't afford books. We're finding crematoriums are being privatised, cemeteries too, sheltered housing is under threat, something that we used to look on as the very essence of a caring society. That's now under threat. Councils use the excuse of government policies, the coalition that we didn't vote for, coalition policies imposing these cuts. And of course they are, and they must accept their share of the blame. But some councillors are also doing what they would do anyway and using the coalition as a smokescreen. And these councils are pursuing hard right policies of privatisation, of cutting back or destroying the local community through the cuts in local services, and often expressing their right-wing agenda in the crudest of language. They are destroying the basis of what was a caring society. Remember the welfare state that we established after the Second World War, where the basis was that we were stronger as a team than we were as individuals, and I think we need to remember that again. And that how are we going to fight back? Well, support the local trade unions in their campaigns, support all the local campaigns in their defence of those many local services. And in supporting them, let's not be content with just marching down the street with a placard, because councillors can survive that. Let's work out how we can really defend them, how we can make it impossible for the council to pursue their policies, which are so hostile to the public interest. And we also demand that union leaders, I would suggest we demand that union leaders also organise and don't just respond with a few words here and there, but make their words mean something. Have to intervene at the workplace, so that's where our strength is. Because we can turn this around, but we can't if we're content with a little protest. So good luck to the campaign. Let's remember, unity is strength, but it's only strong if we do something rather than just talk, which I'm doing now. Too long. So enjoy the film, and good luck to the campaign, and let's make it count.
As a kid, it was always a great pleasure to get on a bus and ask for a half to the naked lady. You know, it was always great, always great.
It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of light, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way.
Actually, I quite like the green spaces. I mean, it's a very green borough. It's nice to walk around. There are lots of interesting places, and you wouldn't really know that you're only 12 miles from the centre of London.
It's really easy to characterise Barnet as being the classic sleepy London suburb. Residents know that's never been the case.
There is 21 town centres in Barnet, which makes it unique compared to many other boroughs, so there's no sort of central area which dominates particular demands. It's spread across the borough.
I'm here 4 years, and I would notice the change perhaps in the Broadway, in the closure of so many shops, and again, though we're fortunate that others have replaced them, the old traditional shops of art shops, hardware shops, are all losing. I think the movement away from the Broadway doesn't help the community.
It's pity how some of the specialised shops are disappearing. You know, you used to be able to go to shops and ask for advice, and they would tell you how to mend your things or do whatever. And these shops are unfortunately disappearing, and you know, it's been the high streets have been taken over by these big shops, where the staff haven't got a knowledge, and you have to take what's given to you. You haven't got much choice.
Most councils, they don't set out to be deliberately evil and nasty to people per se. In that sense, it's always about policies and the impact that it has upon people generally, and how it would hit some people a bit more than others. Let me just say first that Barnet, you see, like all councils, but Barnet is noted for it being a relatively wealthy borough.
Whilst I was resisting at first, because I knew it would take a lot of time, I decided to start a blog. I thought I'd only be half as funny as Mrs. Angry of Broken Barnet, and sadly that is the case. I am only half as funny as her, but I have a different perspective. I look at money and I look at democracy. I started because of the increase in the car parking permits for parking in the CPZ, which were a rather extreme 150% increase, and for which there's a judicial review slowly working its way through the courts. It's fallen at the first hurdle, a paper request, but now David Atfield, the solicitor, is pursuing an oral request in front of a judge. There's a very strong argument that the permits price has been increased not to control congestion, as is the argument, or for supply and demand, but just because the motorist is an easy target, has to have a car, as many of us do, and he can't not pay.
Initially the cost was pretty small, I think 35p, and then it was 40p, so that was really not an issue at all. Then it rose to £1, and people started grumbling a bit, and I thought, well, you know, it's a recession and we need to pay our way, and that's reasonable, that's okay, we can deal with that. And then it went from £1 to £4. So we had an increase in a decade of a charge having gone from 35p to £4. A near neighbour of mine, when we first talked about the charge, was actually crying because you know, pretty much her big pleasure in life is being visited by her family, and now she suddenly feels she can't invite them round freely anymore. You know, I saw her kids and grandchildren drop by 2-3 times a week, very, very regularly. A huge pleasure for this lady, probably a good pleasure for the grandkids as well. Now that suddenly becomes as expensive an activity as having a luxury gym membership, which just seems a ridiculous situation.
We also have a big economy in people commuting into town, into the centre of London, and coming back with hopefully with very big pay packets and spending them in the local shops here.
Most of us have been here for some time. Everybody, without exception, is up in arms about the way this parking system has been implemented without consultation. Everybody is complaining about the drop in turnover. It's affecting each and every one of us. This is a very small high road. It's very community orientated. Our residents and our shopkeepers are all up in arms. There is so much anger and so much objections to this current parking regime, and it seems incredible that Barnet Council seem totally oblivious to what's going on in this local area.
In hairdressers, we usually are known for talking about the weather. Actually, in Barnet, we talk about parking, and it's so expensive to park, and I feel like an NCP car park attendant rather than a hairdresser.
The theft of mobile phones in the area have gone through the roof, and yet we find it incredible that people are expected to stand in the street and fiddle around with mobile phones clearly visible to any mugger walking by, with purses in hand, credit cards in hand, a really, really bad idea.
Smartphones and so on are very expensive, and they are now a particularly exchangeable commodity for thieves. And I think significantly talking about the technology, that the increase this year is exclusively down to smartphones being taken.
Desperately need someone at the council to sit up and listen, because this will be the death of me and many others. At a local business meeting last week, beginning of January 2012, Mr. Nick Walkley, Finance Minister for Barnet, was, his words, not mine, was pissed off the way, the rough treatment he got at the business meeting. Mr. Walkley, we are seriously pissed off at our treatment from Barnet Council. You're killing us, you're not listening, and you're insulting our intelligence, telling us you're here to help us. Please listen.
A common theme of mine is we can't be complacent and we need to up the pace, and I get quite irritated when that doesn't happen.
Barnet Council doesn't seem to, or at least the councillors, don't seem to remember that they're there to represent us, not to tell us what to do. But their own rules say you cannot make money out of parking charges. Parking charges are to aid the flow of traffic through the borough, to aid the flow of traffic through the high streets. And yet they're putting up the cost of the permits, the price of the permits, the price of parking, in order to fill up the coffers. I mean, this is written in their own language, in their own things that they publish.
I'm a solicitor by profession, so naturally I started looking into the legality of the situation, and I came to the conclusion that it was probably unlawful as well. The effect is that a CPZ resident pays £10 in order to save £1 of everyone else's council tax, and that's just not a fair situation.
So it's easy money, take 10,000 permits at an extra £60 each, and you have an awful lot of money every year extra coming in.
People want to get out, that's what well-being's all about. It's about people's mobility,
Yeah. I've been told that I'm a job seeker now. I haven't been doing that for the past 11 years, but I decided that yes, I was disabled, and
he must have been an expert, Bill.
Yes, exactly. But funnily enough, not disabled enough to get DLA. Actually, they told me that there was going to be no such thing as DLA. So now, instead of getting my disability living allowance and mobility, I'm on the weekly job seekers allowance.
And how's it affected you?
Well, I'm short, and it was just about all right. It was bearable, but I don't go out much. It's going to be a long old winter.
We're Barnet residents, and we're unhappy, totally, absolutely unhappy with the conduct of London Borough of Barnet with regard to the treatment of people with learning difficulties and disabled people in general around the borough. And the basis of our disappointment and disgust really is the fact that there has been no meaningful consultation whatsoever. Any moral obligation or submission to decency or respect for people with disabilities has just been thrown out of the window. I'm a member of a group called CADS, which has started off, it's spelt CADDS, and basically it's a campaign against destruction of disabled support services. And we've interviewed lots of people now because I've been out leafleting and things of that nature. And we're finding that this lack of consultation is all over the borough. There's been no real meaningful consultation. And the consequence of these changes are quite dramatic. I mean, they've closed down a purpose-built day centre, and they built this centre called The Space, and for this special group. Now that purpose-built centre is no longer a day centre. You know, I mean, there is no curriculum, there is no organisation. So we don't know how long that's going to last. They're dumped out into church halls on Sundays rather than a purpose-built day centre. And this is under the guise of a policy that they call more choice, and it actually offers less choice.
My contribution is to ensure that users have a greater say in particular services. So we've done a lot of work getting users involved in new organisations where there are specific needs to be met there. Happen to think that there'll be better decisions and better tailored services.
And one story this week that has been overturned is a young man who's had his support worker with physical disability. He's had his support worker hours cut, and he has to wriggle to the toilet if his support worker doesn't come in the morning because the hours have been cut. And he has lain there with faeces and urine-stained trousers, pyjamas, and he lays there then till the carer comes in again.
It comes down at the end of the day to poor services, to vulnerable people. I mean, people who are using services, who need their social services. And we're talking about personal care to some people, about sometimes it's care staff that have to stay with someone overnight, for instance. It's day services, it's day centers, it's activities, it's transport for people who who can't get from A to B because they're disabled or because they need accompaniment and supervision and so on. If they will privatize this now, then the accountability is as much as accountability as we have now that it is within the council, and they should be at least accountable to us as residents and as carers and service users or families of service users. This will go, because who's going to monitor the private companies?
The culture that we've experienced is vile, absolutely horrific, and it starts from the very top with the directors and the senior managers who use fear to intimidate and manipulate and withdraw services, and they spend a lot of time and energy and resources in creating difficulties for carers rather than supporting carers to provide the services that their son or daughter or elderly family member needs.
Last May, when this present Tory administration was re-elected, the very first act that they took was to sneak in an attempt to vote themselves all a big fat pay rise. At the council meeting at which this was being voted through, only one Tory councillor dared not to support the vote. In fact, she abstained. Her name was Kate Salinger.
That's community space.
It's community
Public
space.
property. No, I understand that, and I get the feeling that most people here agree with you. Yes, Councillor.
And she was immediately punished in public in what was really like a ritual punishment, as public stoning, if you like. Her colleagues voted her off every single committee that she had a position on, and she actually left the chamber in tears and had to be assisted out of the town hall by a female Labour councillor. I'm afraid her colleagues stood by and allowed this to happen, which is an indication of, again, the culture of bullying, which is projecting the policy of this administration.
Barnet Council has responded to the current economic crisis by launching the One Barnet programme.
It's a programme that's going to ruin our lives as residents in Barnet, because it's a programme of privatisation of basically all the services.
Unfortunately, most people in the borough don't understand it. They don't understand that in a year or so's time, when their elderly parent needs a home or their child has problems and they need support from the local authority, it's actually going to be provided by a private company, and there'll be very little choice if things go wrong, what they can do.
Basically what is happening in Barnet is rapidly moving through mass outsourcing to a position where it becomes a commissioning council, where there will be the vast bulk of the staff will be outsourced primarily to large national or transnational companies, and there'll be a small core staff left, the client side if you like, and all the rest will be on the contract side.
Staff are my second priority. My first priority is actually towards delivering improved services. So it means sometimes giving some tough messages that they might have a different employer, that we might be cutting budgets, and therefore getting the balance right between being supportive while simultaneously having to give those really tough messages. It is the job.
Do you realise they're privatising the council? BT is taking the whole council over. BT has a department for whatever they call it, community affairs or local, I think even local governments or something like that. And the head of that department is called Max Wide, and he was seconded to Barnet Council for a year. In other words, he became Barnet Council's Director of Planning. So I said, Mr. Wide, who are you representing? Are you representing? No, I didn't. You don't ask the question directly to him. Is Mr. Wide here representing BT or the residents of Barnet? And the official reply I got was, Mr. Wide represents the council. So, what does that mean? So I said, well, who's paying for his? Who pays his wages? And they said, BT pays his wages, but we have an arrangement. They've employed one of ours too.
In Barnet, we've seen sell-offs before. Westminster Council sold Mill Hill Cemetery for 5p in the 1980s. They spent hundreds of thousands of pounds buying it back after local uproar. Now Barnet Council are trying it again. Many local people are worried that once again their loved one's final resting place will be left to rack and ruin.
The first batch of privatisation of social services was with the elderly care homes.
I mean, we may be a very conservative council, but we're very concerned to protect the old people and children, and everything we do at the moment budgetarily is directed to doing just that.
And they outsourced it to a company called Fremantle, who's I think a sub-company of another housing association called Catalyst. And anyway, earlier this year it came out that they discovered Legionella bacteria in the water resources of some of these homes. We're talking about homes for very frail old people. So obviously they'll be more susceptible to the Legionella disease and so on. And then I think actually it was the council's environmental health officers, they were the one alerted that something needs to be done, that the levels of, this is bacteria that's normally in water, but the levels of it there was much higher. And then started a whole debate, whose responsibilities? Is it the council who has the, eventually we tried to argue, ultimately it's the council's responsibility because they are the ones who have the duty of care towards these people who they placed in these homes.
What is being done to ensure that the risk is properly transferred to private sector contractors who take over any council services?
Madam Mayor, in this instance, it was part of the contractual arrangements that the risk gets passed back to the council. Actually, this contractor has not done anything wrong in what they've done. The infrastructure has come to its end of its life, and therefore we then take on the risk, and we dealt with that risk. And at no time has the data been in danger of being lost. So just like to clarify that point, and I hope that answers
You're kidding.
Councillor Moore's question.
I learnt about MetPro, which was the security company that the council used that turned out not to have a contract, not to be properly registered with the Security Industry Association, not to have CRB checks, even though they were working with vulnerable children, and had been paid over £1 million, and were, I wasn't at this council meeting, but to all accounts they were quite aggressive in dealing with people at a public meeting, and indeed didn't let the public into a public meeting.
Did they sit down? No, sir. No one comes in the building, that's what we've been told.
Barnet has been outsourcing on a relatively smaller scale, small size contracts for a number of years. In the vast majority of cases, there's been some major crises in those contracts. Contracts have been terminated, and the level of contract monitoring, the level of internal audit investigation of those contracts has been shown to be very poor. And the point I would make is that a local authority that's got such a poor track record in monitoring and auditing contracts which are £2-3 million, and now it's moving into contracts which are 50 times that size. That raises really fundamental problems about their ability to do that.
I came into care services from quite a successful background, entertainment background. And I came to work for the London Borough of Barnet in 1993, and I was made redundant in March of this year, which is 2011. At the time I decided that because care services were being run down, I would then open up my own day centre, resource centre, and I put together a very good team to do this. We then we had several people who wanted to come over to us from Barnet. Unfortunately, despite the council since 2008 purporting to offer people the choice of services, as we approach 2012, nobody is having any choice of services. And what concerns us is that in 2012, the London Borough of Barnet is to open up its own local authority trading company, and we wonder whether or not clients who would like to come with us will actually go to Barnet.
That's not to say that it's all doom and gloom, and that with that scarcity there's the opportunity for quite a lot of innovation and challenge about the way we do things.
You know, that's life as it is at the moment, boys. It's gloomy. It's absolutely bloody gloomy.
Ooh, what do I do as leader? Indeed, that's a good question. What would I like to change about Barnet? Well, I'm not sure that there's very much I can change about Barnet, so I've set my aspirations quite low.
Like a ton of bricks, everything was heavy, heavy.